From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Hello, I'm Riley Lyons, and these are your news and sports headlines for 12 p.m. The Integrated Homicide Investigation Team is looking for witnesses for an early morning shootout in Surrey. Yesterday morning, Surrey RCMP responded to a report of an unconscious man in the driver's seat of a running vehicle. The man suffered injuries consistent with a shooting. He was later identified as 27-year-old Richard Ofschwenze of Edmonton, Alberta. RCMP said that the man had ties to drug trafficking in Alberta, and investigators believe that this was an isolated incident and the motive has yet to be determined. IHIT is urging any witnesses or anyone who is traveling in the 8800th block of 127th Street in Surrey between 8 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. to speak with police. Several BC officials are giving an update today on public safety in the province. This afternoon, Solicitor General Mike Farnworth, Attorney General Murray Rankin, and other experts will give an address discussing policing and mental health. The announcement may include details on a provincial prolific offenders report, but details are currently scarce. The prolific offenders report is expected to be released later this month. Former VPD Deputy Chief Doug Lepard said that in May that this report investigates prolific offenders and the increase in random violent attacks in Vancouver. The Canadian federal government will be easing restrictions at the border. Random COVID testing and use of the ArriveCan app will no longer be necessary come September. Bonnie Chagwa has more.
Canada will have fewer requirements upon entering for non-Canadian residents visiting. Tourism within the country has seen a decline in business due to border restrictions, ArriveCan, and random testing since it was first placed last year. Mandy Rousseau, a manager in communications for Whistler's Tourism, says the system that was in place was causing complaints from international tourists that travel to Whistler on vacation.
For example, flying through YVR will have shuttles organized, and if they get selected for random testing, it could mean that they have to do their testing in Vancouver and they miss their shuttle, or if they're traveling as a family, the hiccup that might cause if one individual has to stay behind, and then how does that impact the rest of the group.
Elimination of requirements can be seen as beneficial for tourism in BC, where international tourists do not need to make a choice to travel to other countries with less requirements for entry. I'm Bonnie Chikawa for 1680 The Crow.
And we are now joined by Bonnie Chikawa. Bonnie, what will tourism be like for this upcoming winter season for Whistler, since it's been announced that it's going to be easier to get into Canada?
Well, Riley, Whistler will see an uprise Whistler will see an uprise. It became known for its winter activities since the Winter Olympics, and they are a year-round destination spot, especially July and August being their summer peak, and we will expect to see more international and heavy volume amount of people this year.
Has there been a spike in local tourism in Whistler recently?
Yes, people across Canada, especially the East Coast, have been visiting. Tourism has been more local than international in the past few years, but they will expect more international, possibly in the next few months for their winter season.
Okay, thanks so much, Bonnie.
Thank you.
A couple is suing the Metro Vancouver Regional District for negligence regarding the 2020 Cleveland Dam incident. The woman, Chihiro Nakamura, was rescued from the Capilano River and says she suffered physical injuries and PTSD. In her statement, Nakamura says that there was no warning on October 1st that the water would come down the river from the dam. After a comprehensive post-incident review, Metro Vancouver installed 7 alarms to alert river users to an event of an accidental release. Nakamura is seeking damages for her pain and suffering, as well as other losses. Stats Canada says that New Westminster residents are facing unaffordable housing issues. Yesterday, during a pre-debate interview, a new candidate running for mayor in New West this October claimed he can fix this problem. Astapande Kanan has more on the story.
Candidate for Mayor Kenneth Armstrong is not satisfied with the current leadership's work and says nothing is being done right now. If elected, Armstrong is rolling out a new housing plan that includes development of 1,500 new low-income family-friendly rental housing units by 2028 and increasing secondary suites and laneway homes by 2026.
The thing that would be different is trying to reduce spot rezoning and directing staff to prepare us a bylaw that would support pre-approved fast-tracking for the development of nonprofit housing.
However, Patrick Johnstone, current councillor and opposing candidate, says that's not true and the city has already approved the fast-track process for funding to make sure all supportive housing being built is done so quickly. Asta Pandikanan for 1680 The Crow.
The population of Indigenous Canadians is currently growing faster than non-Indigenous Canadians, as stated in a recent Stats Canada census. Emily Javeski has more.
The census says Indigenous people make up 5% of the total population in Canada. The Indigenous population grew by 9.4% from 2016 to 2021, which is faster than the non-Indigenous population, but not as rapid as it has been in years past. The Indigenous population is also more than 8 years younger on average than the non-Indigenous population. Statistics Canada also found that Indigenous people are much more likely to live in a low-income household. Emily Joveski, The Canadian Press.
U.S. President Joe Biden delivered strong criticisms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the UN General Assembly. Sagar Magani has more.
In his second address to the UN General Assembly, the president called it a brutal, needless war.
Russia has shamelessly violated the core tenets of the United Nations Charter
by trying to erase a sovereign state from the map through force.
That should make your blood run cold.
Among a series of other global crises, the president also noted the invasion's impact on the world food supply, saying the U.S. is pledging $2.9 billion to fight food insecurity.
If parents cannot feed their children, nothing else matters.
Sagar Magani, Washington.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered a partial mobilization of reservists. Tom Rivers has more.
President Putin has ordered a partial mobilization of reservists, about 300,000 personnel. He also warns the West he isn't bluffing over using all means at his disposal to protect Russia's territory in what appears to be a veiled reference to Russia's nuclear capability. The address comes a day after Moscow-controlled regions in eastern and southern Ukraine announced plans to hold referendums on becoming parts of Russia, a move that could set the stage for Moscow to escalate its war. Tom Rivers, ABC News at the Foreign Desk.
The New York Attorney General has filed a $250 million civil lawsuit against former U.S. President Donald Trump. Aaron Katursky has more.
For 20 years, New York Attorney General Letitia James said Donald Trump and his family enriched themselves through numerous acts of fraud and misrepresentations. Her lawsuit accused the Trumps of grossly inflating Trump's net worth by billions of dollars, cheating lenders and insurers. Trump, for example, valued his Mar-a-Lago country club at $779 million based on what the lawsuit called a false premise about its development potential. The suit said it should have been $75 million. Trump has denied wrongdoing, but James believes the alleged conduct to be potentially criminal and has referred her findings to federal prosecutors. Aaron Katursky, ABC News, New York.
And now for your sports headlines. According to police, several members of the BC Lions and Calgary Stampeders were involved in a verbal altercation in the parking lot of the McMahon Stadium after the team's match on Saturday evening. The incident is linked to a punch that was thrown on the field by Stampeders linebacker Cameron Judge at the end of the game, which landed him a one-game suspension. Videos post-game after the punch showed several players in a skirmish, with the receiver of the punch, Lucky Whitehead, standing up dazed. Here's Cameron Judge.
I feel like that's been discussed with the people who really need to hear it, and I could have definitely handled it better than how I did, but I'm going to take my punishment and just move forward.
The two teams are set to meet again on Saturday at BC Place. BC Lions head coach Rick Campbell says that this upcoming game is too important to allow any distractions. The Blue Jays are in Philadelphia tonight against the Phillies, looking for a quick 2-game series win to hold their wildcard position. Ross Stripling is expected to start for the Jays, making it his 22nd start of the season. Veteran Kyle Gibson is expected to start for the Phillies, making his 29th start of the season. Last night, the Jays had a dominant 18-11 win over the Phillies. Rob Thompson, the Phillies manager, says that they just couldn't match the Jays' offense. Phoenix Suns and Phoenix Mercury owner Robert Sarver says he's starting the process to sell his teams. This comes a week after the league suspended him for a year and fined him $10 million for an investigation into racist and sexist workplace misconduct. In the suspension, he's not allowed to participate in any NBA or WNBA events or enter any buildings or office spaces. I'm Riley Lyons, and you're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
your podcast companion call on 1680 The Crow. I'm your host, Astapandi Kanan, with my producer, Mac Fleet. Today I'm joined by two very special guests who are here to talk about something that can be quite hard for many to talk about. We often talk about how diverse Canada is. You know, I wholeheartedly believe that diversity is one of the biggest strengths that we have in this country. However, recently there have been many instances where minority groups have been subjected to hate crimes. Just last week, members of the BC Muslim community called for a more concrete action to address Islamophobia in our province and in Canada. And Stats Canada has actually revealed that Arabs and West Asians, from 2020 to 2021, there's been a 46% increase in hate crimes towards them. And specifically, a 71% increase in anti-Muslim hate crime between 2020 to 2021. And today, I actually have Bassam Abunadi, the director at Reclaim, a grassroots organization that works with educational institutions to address and combat Islamophobia. And I have Shane Hashmi, who volunteers with Aspire, a project by a Muslim food bank here to assist new immigrants and refugees in Canada. Shane is also a former member of the Langley Muslim Association before he moved to Surrey. So thank you, Bassam and Shane, for being here with us today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's our honor to have you to talk about something that, you know, not many people like to talk about. So I'm just going to go right into it. What is your reaction when you hear about anti-Muslim hate crime? Like, what is your first reaction?
Well, I hope that my reaction is the same as everybody else's reaction. If we take the premise that Muslims are an integral part of the Canadian mosaic and that we are a part of the Canadian family, then my hope is that all Canadians are alarmed when they hear that any of their neighbors are being attacked because of their faith or because of their outward expression of their faith. Now, of course, being a member of the community, I do get to experience the lingering fear that sticks around when the cameras have gone. All Muslims that I know and that I speak with are worried about the next attack, whether in their places of worship or in their homes or when their wives and their daughters and their sons are walking to school or walking to work or walking to the bus. There is a palpable sense of discomfort and fear.
Yeah. Shane, how about you? Have recent events made you scared? How do you feel?
Yes, I feel about the same as Suad mentioned, and we have experienced similar circumstances. Most recently in Langley, well, that was about a year and a half ago. During Ramadan, there was a break-in in our Masala, that small mosque. And then recently in Surrey, when I moved to Surrey a few months ago, I was told, actually it was during Ramadan as well, when there was some graffitiing around the masjid area. And also there was an attack on some Muslims who were returning from the late night prayer. So a guy in a car was like threatening to overrun them. So that was a very big eye-opener for us. So then we interacted with the local police and informed them, and they informed us that they will be there to assist whenever there's a problem. But again, like Suad mentioned, there's a sense of discomfort among the Muslim community, especially when Ramadan time comes, and these kind of concerns, they arise because a lot of Muslims, they go to the mosques and then they get to experience these kind of unpleasant experiences.
Why do you think that is the case? Why do you think it's prevalent in Canada? Like, why does that happen in your community?
Well, it's to look at it holistically. I think it's I would blame the media to some extent, unfortunately, because Muslims are portrayed as they do these actions because of their faith, which is absolutely incorrect. So they need to be educated, the media needs to be educated and also guided on how to present news when certain kind of news they occur.
Right. Bassam, did you have anything?
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on that, and I'll try to be concise. So here goes. Nations, as we understand them, are essentially, at their very core, stories. They are carefully curated collections of facts that are put together in nice, neat packages and delivered through standardized education systems. That's essentially what a national story is. And the national stories are manifested in public institutions, the police, even something as innocuous as your public mail service, centers of learning. This is essentially how a nation state functions. It's the most popular and successful political model in the world. Canada has a very poor sense of itself relative to almost every other nation state that I've studied, looked at, read about. Canada has a very, very loose idea of what it is. And there are a ton of PhDs written about this, what it means to be Canadian. The opportunity that presents is it allows Canadians to continuously retell their story and to re-explore what it means to be Canadian. And on the most superficial level, this is a great time to be a Muslim because we're able to tell the story of Canada with ourselves in it. And because the Canadian story is so fluid and so open, we have an opportunity to do that in a way that Muslims in a lot of other countries, and not just Muslims, but other minorities in a lot of other countries just wouldn't be allotted that opportunity. It's just not possible. The pushback to that, though, or the flip side to that, is that people who are attached to a particular idea of Canada, however vague, however loosely defined, people who are very attached to that vision of Canada, when they're seeing hijabis on billboards and when they're seeing a cabinet that looks nothing like the Canada that they have in mind, they will push back, and they will push back hard. And so I think what you're seeing is a competition over what the idea of Canada actually is.
Oh, wow. Do you have anything to add to this, Shane?
Yes, I think so. I'd address the, probably I would call it the root cause. So it stems from right where it starts, actually, educational institutions and departments as well. Mm-hmm. So I'm as a local Muslim, a member of the community, what I experienced, so I recollected that and informed you about it. But I agree with Suad that there needs to be done, something needs to be done to address this at the root level.
Right. I have a quick question for you, Shane. You brought up the media. What do you think the media can do differently? What would you like us to do differently to help eradicate Islamophobia?
Right. I think the first thing they should stop using the term like Islamists or Islamic terrorists. I mean, they're actually linking terrorism to the faith. And I mean, if you look at it, if some non-Muslims does a similar act, then no one calls that person a Christian terrorist or so and so. So that I believe is unfair. So that should be those terms should be avoided. Mm-hmm. And people get crazy; they do crazy things, but shouldn't be linked with their faith. That's what I believe.
Right, 100%. And Bassam, I know that you work at Reclaim. You work with students, you work with schools and districts. So can you tell us a little bit about how you're working towards, eradicating or combating anti-Muslim bigotry?
Sure. So a big part of what we do is to help educators transform Muslims into the protagonists in their own stories rather than the antagonist or the extra in somebody else's story. Now, what does that actually mean? It means celebrating Muslims and their history and their experiences in the way that they genuinely experience the world, in the way that they actually see themselves and the way that they actually see the world, even if that means, and this part is very important, even in a classroom where the way that Muslims may remember something is radically different and potentially uncomfortable for other people in the classroom. A classroom, especially one filled with children, should be respectful to everyone. It should be comfortable or should be tolerant of everyone. But a classroom is also a place where you could challenge certain normative truths or certain beliefs or certain narratives. You want to talk about a timely launch point here. There's perhaps no better example I've ever seen in my life of how one group of people experience an event and a person and have a memory about something, and another people experience an event and a memory about something than the death of the Queen. If you have a large, if you're all over social media, then you saw something akin to a Canadian schizophrenia, where one group are posting eulogies and a whole bunch of other subaltern groups are basically posting memes, right? And so how did we arrive at that? Now, of course, I do really need to reiterate the importance of being respectful and courteous and mindful of everyone who's around you. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there are people in your classroom, there are people in your lecture halls who have a completely different memory of events of the past. And if they want to feel like they are part of the classroom, that they are part of the lecture hall, and they are subsequently part of that institution and that country and that place and that neighborhood, then they need to be able to share their stories.
I have a rather personal question for you guys. I'm married to a Palestinian Muslim man, and one of the things he said to me really stuck with me, and he said, Asta, there are some times that I don't introduce myself as a Palestinian Muslim. I just avoid the topic altogether because I know how a person's going to look at me. Have you been in that situation? Have you caught yourself in a place where you're not able to, Shane, let's start with that you're not able to say who you are?
No, I feel happy with what I am, with my faith, so I don't have any problem expressing myself and declaring myself as a Muslim, and so I don't have any such fears. Some people may have when they're pushed to a certain situation, so maybe I haven't been in such a situation where I had to do that, but I'm pretty confident that I don't have any problem expressing myself, so yes.
Yeah, I love that for you. Yeah.
I also happen to be a Muslim and a Palestinian, incidentally enough, and that was not planned, but here we are. While I do not have that exact sentiment, what I could say from experience is that sometimes being a Palestinian and being a Muslim is tiring. I work in this space. I talk about these things all the time. That doesn't mean I always feel like it, though. So sometimes, while I can't say that I do exactly what your husband described, sometimes I hear things that I decide not to address just because I don't have the energy for it. There are times where I just want to be watching MMA, like where I just want to be, reading my book in the park, where I just want to be looking after my kids, and I don't want to get into like a long political conversation with the people talking about Mideast politics. Now, I should say that more often than not, I do get involved, but sometimes I choose to ignore it because it's tiring.
Right. Yeah. Shane, can you talk a little bit about Aspire and what you guys do as a non-for-profit organization?
Yes, not-for-profit organization, and it's being run by a Muslim food bank that, as the name says, that it distributes food to the needy. So they initiated a project about 6 years ago when the Syrian refugees started coming in. So they invited volunteers to come and help and basically teach them English and help them get settled in the society. So I participated in that back 6 years ago. And then most recently, more refugees started coming in, especially from Afghanistan. So I'm doing a similar role, involved in a similar role now as well, helping them get settled here. They're looking at their basic needs, what they need, like for example, language problem or well, I would say the ones that I've been dealing with, they're very good. They know English, But the other issues like settling down and finding a doctor and then getting their resume up to date and according to Canadian standards, so things like that.
Have you faced any difficulties, or have the refugees who've come in, or faced any difficulties being Muslim, or just with the cultural shock here?
Right. Well, understandably so. There is some cultural shock, but I haven't heard any complaints about being targeted for being a Muslim. So fortunately, they get to mix up with their local communities, Muslim communities, so they get comfortable, and we also help them in doing that. And then gradually, our job is to just get them help into some point, and then after that we close the case and then move on to the next, because there are a lot of cases that we have to deal with.
Right, yeah. Bassam, can you talk a little bit about what else you do with Reclaim, in at least what are you doing in your capacity to eradicate or combat?
I should say that a significant amount of my energy and time is actually spent speaking to the Muslim community. Okay. So I don't know if the listeners know this, but October is officially recognized in Canada as Islamic History Month. And for most Muslims, Canadian Muslims and non-Canadian Muslims, this is kind of a blanket statement, they have a very vague understanding of their own past. Now, that's rooted in two forces. One is being subjected to the rule of the most Islamophobic regimes on earth who rule the modern Muslim world, but also centuries of colonialism. And so the average Muslim will have a somewhat familiar understanding of like the prophetic age and early Islamic history. And then there's this giant black hole, and then there's modern lived experience, and everything in between is a blur. So I spend a lot of time speaking with Muslims just about the stories of the Islamic world. The purpose of this is to equip Canadian Muslims with a dignified version of their own past. That's not to say that I aim to provide them with a fantastical version of their past, because I think it's very important to be historically accurate and to be honest. But I want Muslims to be able to look at their own past and see that we did contribute to the human story. We were part of the human experience, and we were not just subjects of somebody else. Right. Again, to transform Muslims into the protagonists in their stories.
I understand what you mean by transforming Muslims to the protagonists. Is that something based off of like self or internalized racism? Is that what you're combating, or am I understanding that wrong?
No, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So if you most of it, we spoke off air a bit, but in addition to the work that I do, I also have a podcast on Palestinian history, which is called Preoccupation. And if you read books about Palestine that were written before, let's say like 1960, even if they were written by Palestinians, they were overwhelmingly relying on colonial sources. Right. Even if they were trying to give like an honest account of their own history. So there's a lot of work. I don't just want to say to be undone. Maybe that's not fair, but there are a lot of stories that we have not explored yet, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I want to ask both of you more about your own lived experiences. I know we're talking about how to eradicate what happens, hate crimes, but in your own specific experiences, what is it to have a Muslim identity? Who are you? Like, what is it to you to be Muslim?
Well, living in Canada is different. I lived in Pakistan as well for about 25 years. So being in a Muslim country is totally different. Living in a non-Muslim country is different. But with time, there are more and more Muslims coming to Canada. So that's making a difference, in my opinion. We have a lot of mosques here and there, and there are Muslim schools. And but then there is a fear in the back of the mind. Like my wife wears a hijab. So initially when she used to go to work, I was very worried, because there were incidences happening those days. But with time, she gets a lot of respect at work, so she doesn't have any issues. But in the back of my mind, used to be, but now I'm okay because maybe because of time has passed and then nothing has happened, nothing bad has happened, thankfully. And so it's not, I won't say it's not, I haven't experienced anything lucky as well, and neither in my friends, but when we hear about incidences like during Ramadan, as I mentioned, those incidences, they're disturbing. They're disturbing, right? Because that can happen to anyone. I also go for late night prayers during Ramadan. So sometimes when a car is passing by and I'm alone on the road, I do tend to just be careful. So there's fear in the back of my mind, but I tend to not think about it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Sorry, I'm just going to dig a little bit deeper. How do you not think about it? How do you mask the fear?
Well, by remembering Creator, because He controls our destiny, right? When we die, when we live. So that's if you have that faith, then you tend to just trust in Him, in the Creator.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Bassam?
If I've understood the question correctly, it's how do I understand or how would I explain what a Muslim identity is like?
Your specific Muslim identity.
For myself, and if I was put in, as I am at this moment, of explaining what it feels like to be a Muslim, what I think is really important for a non-Muslim audience to understand is that modern Muslims carry with them numerous, sometimes complementary, but often conflicting collective identities. So while Muslim is one identity and a very, very, very important one that I carry, it's also colored by a bunch of other identities that I have. And I'll illustrate this with just like the simplest story that I can. And I've told it a few times and I think it captures it quite well. One of my neighbors asked me 2 summers ago, Bassam, where are you from? And I said, I'm Palestinian. And she said, oh, that's like our other neighbor, but she's from Jordan. And I said, no, actually, she's also Palestinian. She's from Nablus, and I'm from Jaffa. These are towns in Palestine. Mm-hmm. She said, but she told me she's Jordanian. I said, well, I'm also Jordanian. And she looked at me like I was speaking Russian, like she had no idea what I... And then she said, but she told me that she was born in the Emirates, so doesn't that make her Emirati, like from the Emirates? I said, no, and I was born in Saudi Arabia. And she said, oh, so you're Saudi Arabian. I said, no, I'm Palestinian. And I can assure you, first of all, I wasn't trying to be difficult. I was chasing after my daughter at the time. But she had no idea what I was talking about. Now, those things, the question, just the question, if I'm in a taxi in Jordan and the taxi driver asks me, where are you from the context of the question, I understand if he's asking me, where are you from in the world? Like, where do you reside? Because there's something off about your accent. Or where do you live in Jordan? Or where are you from originally? I know which one they're trying to ask, and it's a historian who I have a great relationship with named Michael Province, and in his writing about the Syrian civil war, not the current one, sorry, about the Syrian uprising in 1925, he said that there was one Syria, but there were many Syrian nationalisms. Right? Every Muslim carries with themselves a family identity, a tribal identity, a linguistic identity, a regional identity, and so, of course, I understand that for a non-Muslim audience, this can be very confusing. Every single one of those identities, though, touches on Islam and specifically the personality of the Prophet ﷺ in some way, shape, or form. Political legitimacy in the Palestinian experience was often tied to which families are actually descended from the prophetic lineage. And anyways, I could go on and on about that. But this is something that I think... I strive to explain to non-Muslim audiences that it's not just one, there's not just one identity that person in front of you is carrying with them.
Right, 100%. In the interest of time, unfortunately, I do have to wrap up today, but is there anything else you'd like to leave us and your audience, your non-Muslim audience with?
No, I think everyone knows what kind of citizen they're supposed to be. So I would say just be that citizen and respect other people's faith and their identities, and then we also respect everyone and their identities. So yeah, and then just be a vibrant community.
Yeah, 100%.
I grew up watching my dad yell at the TV.
Peter Percival knew his dream job would be firefighting since elementary school. Even though after graduation he put it on the back burner to do construction, he eventually came back to the dream, got certified in Texas, and now works for the Surrey Fire Department. Besides being a fighter, Peter has a side hobby of fishing and creating fishing reels. Doing things with fishing helps Peter cast away the stress of the job.
You know, it's just a relief for me, right? Fishing is, I find though that it gets harder and harder to drive an hour and a half, 2 hours to go fishing sometimes, right? I like to set up at the lake for a week and just relax, right? By the fire, fish a little bit and relax. So yeah, it's all an avenue to release stress.
Peter has always had a long history with fishing growing up, from the Mill Lake Fishing Derby to family trips. But it wasn't until later in life when a family member asked to go fishing that things really changed.
And then he said, "Do you want to go?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds like fun." And then boom, it was like I was hooked, right? Like we would go twice a weekend, right? And I remember hiking into that limit hole and running out of leaders and not knowing how to tie our own, driving back to Fred's, driving back to the limit hole, hiking back in there. Come a long ways. Yeah, that's how salmon fishing started for me, right?
Aside from fishing, Peter now creates fishing reels with his father-in-law out of their garage. The story of how that started is kind of an interesting one.
My father-in-law is a machinist, and he's a very smart man. He's born in Germany, trained in Germany, so and he has a machine in his garage. So we went on a camping trip, kind of a family camping trip, which is a long story because it kind of fish and family tend to stink after 3 days. Anyways, we went on a camping trip. And I brought a Islander reel with me, right, which is made on Vancouver Island. And we took it apart on the picnic table just outside of Alaska and kind of looked at how it was built and thought, he kind of looked at the design and figured, I could probably do this. And that's how it all started, right, is on a picnic table just outside, I guess it would have been more outside of the Yukon. He has a CNC machine, which is a computerized machine. It's 1985, so it's pretty old and antiquated. But he's a wizard on it. It's got a little screen on it. I don't know, maybe 10 inches by 10 inches, and it's green and black, right? So, and then he's got the mill or the lathe, right, to turn different parts and to buff things and he does his own anodizing too, which colors the parts different colors. So he's not afraid to try something or do something, which a lot of times I find that fear holds me back. I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do that, and then you just have to sometimes jump in, right, and say like I'm going to do it and I'm going to just battle through it and it'll work, right?
I asked Peter what he thought of the decline in fish population, and he's noticed a big drop-off in just a short span of time.
The percentage of fish, I mean, it's hard because I don't fish the way I used to, right? I feel like, we used to catch way more fish and fish all day long, but I put a lot more time in on the rivers, right? I don't think it'll run dry, but if you look at the sockeye, you can only fish every 4 years now, right? And then it's like a question mark, like, are they going to open it? Springs, they've had closed on the Fraser for numerous years, so I don't think that the river will be like, oh, the river's void of life. It'll be like, you're not allowed to fish it. That would be not a very good day. But look at what's happened on the Fraser, right? So we'll go from there.
John Reynolds, the chair of aquatic conservation, reminded me that not all of the 5 BC salmon species are necessarily in danger, but some are in trouble. The worst off in southern BC are Chinook and sockeye salmon.
Really gotten into quite a bit of trouble to the point where the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, which I happen to be the chair of, has actually recommended to the federal government that they could be at risk of extinction.
A big issue that John and Peter agree on is commercial fishing when it comes to the population of fish. John is appreciative of what the government has put in place to save the fish.
A lot of recreational fishing is fairly well guided by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans rules. And so if people fish responsibly and look after the fish, if they're putting them back, it certainly wouldn't be in my top list of problems.
I know what John said does sound really bad, but he does believe that the waters won't run dry of fish if people do things properly.
Well, I certainly support the decisions that have been made about reducing commercial fisheries for many species. That is often the easiest thing to do, I must admit, and because the salmon have such complicated life cycles, living in so many different places at different times, that it's hard to do much for them when they're in the ocean, especially when they're juveniles. They're not being caught in fisheries, and they're basically going to live or die according to the amount of food they have and the predators. So the control of commercial fisheries has, in general, been, I think, quite well done.
The last note from John is he wants us to remember to go support local organizations that help better the population of fish, because it's not just the government that makes the changes, so do we. I'm Kiara Collins with co-producer Mac Fleet with 1680 The Crow.
A motorcycle mechanic, Paige Everden, and her mentor tell the story of what it's like being a woman in an industry dominated 90% by men.
Maybe it's like a bit of a rebellious thing for me. Like when people tell me I can't do things, like I want to prove them wrong. Maybe also like I just got used to being told that I couldn't do things because I was a woman growing up, and then I just sort of realized that that wasn't true or right, and like kind of decided that I wanted to be a person that fought those things.
My name is Paige Everden, and I am a motorcycle mechanic. I work at a shop called True Grit.
Sitting in front of me now with dirt and oil stains on her face and clothes is Paige Everden, who has been at BCIT for the last almost 2 years and is working on getting an education to support her dreams and aspirations of working in motorcycle mechanics and metal fabrication.
I took the motorcycle mechanics course and graduated that. And then I applied and got into the metal fabricator foundations course. I did it because I want to do custom work on bikes. And when you're a metal fabricator, you can make bike frames, you can make gas tanks, you can make front ends, you can make you can make anything with metal.
Driving down an industrial road with lots of potholes and dust all around, we come across a large red barn, which is Rochelle Trellenberg's motorcycle mechanic shop.
Paige is great. Paige learned so fast. It just blows my mind when somebody comes in and you really see that they're really good at something just right off the hop, and she absolutely is so good at that, and she's great with people, and she shows up.
Should I just pour it? It should fit. Let me look. I mean, if it's not fitting for you. It sucks to siphon gas, so let's try not to do that. But
both Paige and her boss Rochelle share the same dreams and aspirations towards this workforce.
But you know what? I really have this drive suddenly to go to school to be a motorcycle mechanic. Like something in me just pushed me. So I went to BCIT for during the day, and then I worked in the nights. The dream kind of just was something cool where we'd work on bikes on the side, we'd do these little hangouts, we'd show people what we learned in class, and I really thrived in that environment. It was crazy, right? So, and I posted that I would work basically for baked goods. Anybody that needed their bike fixed, anybody that needed anything having to do with their bike, if I could do it, I would basically do it for free.
At the same time, they share the same struggles and the same obstacles by being a woman in this male-led workforce.
A guy will come in and I'll go out to greet and prep, and they'll walk right past me. And I'll be like, okay. But then the men in the shop that totally support me will be like, no, she's the one you need to speak with. Like, don't even come near me. I don't really allow for the pervert or the chauvinist to come through these doors.
Like Rochelle, Paige has faced a lot of the same misogyny, especially in her classroom.
So many examples. I guess like one thing that happened quite a number of times that like stands out to me is just like the amount of times that I would walk into the room or walk up to the group and they would stop talking because obviously they were talking about something, or maybe me, and they didn't want me to hear what they were saying. And then there were times when they didn't stop talking and I overheard some of the things that they said, and it was like some pretty gnarly stuff about women, you know? And it was just like, it felt really gross. It didn't feel good to experience that kind of thing and hear it. And it just makes you feel like an outsider, you know? Like that was like the general feeling I got from being in that classroom, was just like that I wasn't fully welcome there, I guess. Not by the teacher. The teacher was amazing. Just the guys that like were obviously attracted to the class. Yeah.
And the teacher was a female, right?
That's right, yeah. They never said that kind of stuff around her. They were very careful not to.
Why don't I just dump it out then? The tank? Yeah, you can totally remove the tank. There's a bunch of wires at the bottom that need to be removed, right? So...
Regardless of the misogyny and mistreatment that both Paige and Rochelle have faced coming up in this industry, they still remain optimistic and acknowledge the fact that most of this mistreatment comes from wrongfully engraved lessons in a lot of people's minds that they simply can't change, and they don't let that stop them.
If I'm being honest, like I think that she's doing enough just by having gone into the industry like so long ago and just like existing there and like now being a teacher. I think that that's really, really good. I think that basically like you can't change things overnight, and like it's a bit too much to ask for like one teacher to try and like change the like things that everyone has learned over their entire lives.
Not all the old boys are like that, but the majority that have been in the industry for as long as they have been walking are brutal. Yeah. And they just can't come out of this habit of women are there to touch and talk dirty to, and not to have a collective conversation about what an engine needs. Yeah.
After learning about the major issues of misogyny and mistreatment in this workforce, it leaves you wondering what motivates the small percentage of women struggling to overcome these obstacles and what keeps them going.
Because fuck them. No, for real, like, fuck those guys, you know? Like, because, I mean, actually, okay, like, obviously it's not just spite, but, like, I don't know, you can't let it slow you down.
Paige's rebellious attitude and unwillingness to back down, no matter what obstacles and struggles she faces, is truly inspiring, and she leaves us with this last piece of advice.
I would say that if a person looks at you and makes a snap decision based off of your gender or your appearance, and they decide that they don't want to listen to you, and they decide that they're not going to give you a chance because you're not like what they want to see in the industry, then don't waste your time on them. Just don't bother trying to gain their respect. The only person's respect you need is your own. And as long as you know that you can do it and you understand that like you're a capable person, then you don't have to worry about them, you know?
Riley Lyons and Maha Mashmi for 1680 The Crow.
The mainland Misfits are lacing up their skates for another bone-crunching season of roller derby, a fast-paced, full-contact sport primarily played by women. Our reporter Gurpreet Kambo, who was given the derby name Purple Rain, that's rain spelled R-E-I-G-N, joins us from Surrey.
powerful. I like the focus it brings. So I always found like games and competitions, it's like you enter into this like, you only have one thing to think about, and like that's the game.
It teaches you how to like fall down and get back up again repetitively, and then you can also apply
flamboyant, I think. You know, there was a lot of color, a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, a lot more face paint, stuff like that. It was just a fun time, and it was something I'd never seen before, and I just kind of got the bug.
We became friends through Derby and at Derby, and then slowly started hanging out outside of Derby, and now, yeah, I have a lifelong friend from it.
Blue wheels, pink.
From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good afternoon. My name is Seamus Page, and this is your 1 o'clock news update. Census data from Statistics Canada shows BC to be the most unaffordable province in Canada. The data lists the BC unaffordability rate at 25.5, with Ontario second at 24.2%. They say this is largely because of people paying high rent downtown. Homeownership in Canada has fallen to 66.5% from 69% in 2011. In BC, ownership has fallen from 70% to 66.8%. BC also leads Canada in number of renter households. Vancouver Coastal Health vaccine clinics are offering the two-strain COVID-19 vaccine. This is being done as part of BC's fall booster program. The health authorities say that the new vaccine offers better protection, specifically for Omicron variants, while also strengthening for the original strain. It will be available to adults and youths ages 12 to 17 who are at a higher risk. Metro Vancouver's regional district is being sued for negligence. Chihiro Nakamura was rescued from the Capilano River after the Cleveland Dam accident in 2020. Her claim alleges that there was no warning on the day of the accident, where water came from the dam and came down from the canyon, causing water levels to rise. Nakamura is seeking damages for pain, suffering, loss of income, and other alleged losses. Census data from Statistics Canada also shows that the Indigenous population makes up 5% of the country's population. In the 2021 census, 1.8 million Indigenous people were counted. The agency's director, Christopher Penny, also says that on average, the Indigenous population is also younger.
The average age of Indigenous people was 33.6 years in 2021, compared with 41.8 years for the non-Indigenous population. Inuit were the youngest of the three groups, with an average age of 28.9 years, followed by First Nations people and Métis.
New York Attorney General Letitia James has filed a $250 million civil suit against former U.S. President Donald Trump. She says she is suing Trump, his 3 adult children, and his company, alleging business fraud.
The complaint demonstrates that Donald Trump falsely inflated his net worth by billions of dollars to unjustly enrich himself and to cheat the system, thereby cheating all of us.
Looking over to the UN, Iran's president has stated that his country is serious about reviving a deal that would keep them from accessing nuclear weapons. However, President Ibrahim Raisi questioned whether they could trust America's commitment to an accord. This was referring to America's decision to pull out of their original accord in 2018. U.S. President Joe Biden declared in a speech at the UN that Russia had violated the core tenets of the UN Charter with Putin's war in Ukraine. Biden delivered a strong condemnation of the invasion in front of his international audience. He also highlighted Russia's recent nuclear threats, saying it shows disregard for the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Biden also noted that how the invasion has affected the world food supply and pledged $2.9 billion in global food security aid.
Russia's calling up more soldiers to join the fight, and the Kremlin is organizing a sham referenda to try to annex parts of Ukraine, an extremely significant violation of the UN Charter.
Continuing on with Russia, Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered a partial mobilization of reservists in Russia. This order is instated effective immediately, and this is a potential risk as this will be a very unpopular step, especially considering the recent setbacks in his campaign. Putin also warned that he would use everything at his disposal, apparently a veiled reference to his nuclear weapons. This comes after Russia occupied areas of Ukraine, saying that they would hold a vote to become part of Russia. Now, following Putin's announcement of the partial mobilization, many Russians are booking one-way tickets out of the country. Flights leaving the country have filled up fast, and the prices have drastically increased. As for today's weather, it is currently 11 degrees and is set to be mainly sunny with a high of 21 and a low of 11. The sun is expected to continue until Friday, where it is expected to be rainy. This has been your 1 o'clock news update. I'm Seamus Page with 1680 The Crow.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.